you turn massive clinical imaging data into insights that change lives? What does it take to move from a psychology undergrad to a pioneering role in pediatric brain research? And how can coding, connectomics, and curiosity shape a meaningful clinical career in neuroscience? Dear Neurocareers podcast listeners, welcome to another exciting episode of our podcast. And today we have an amazing guest, Dr. Puck Readers, who is a senior neuroscience research scientist. And we have an amazing opportunity to learn what does it entail to be a neuroscience research scientist and how you can achieve the same in your career. Let's welcome Dr. Readers and thank you for being with us today. Hello, Dr. Readers. It's a great pleasure to have you on our podcast. Can you please introduce yourself and let our listeners know where you are joining us from what part of the world? Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me today. My name is Puck Readers, and I am joining from Miami, Florida. And currently I work at Nicklaus Children's Hospital, which is a children's hospital in Miami.
Yes, thank you very much for your introduction. Dr. Readers, can you maybe tell a little bit about Nicklaus Children's Hospital? What does it do? What is it known for?
Yes, of course. So I started my job about 3 years ago at Nicklaus, and Nicklaus is one of the children's hospitals in Miami. And I actually work in the comprehensive epilepsy program. We are one of the oldest epilepsy programs in the United States, which is incredible. We have been working with kids with epilepsy for over 30 years, which is incredible. So we have kiddos coming from all over the world to our hospital for their surgical evaluation. So we see what they need, where their seizures are coming from, and then we help treat them and we try to reduce their seizure burdens. That is the program I work with, and I am just so excited to be working there. I'm very blessed that I get to be doing research with all the data of our patients there.
Yes, probably you have a lot of data coming from various imaging modalities, from various evaluations, because we know that there is so much going on before even a patient gets into a surgery. And you need to do something with this data to help the team to perform the surgery well, so that the patients not only do better in terms of seizures, but also wouldn't lose any important functions.
For sure. So a lot of the patients come in for their phase 1 evaluations, which means they come in for a full week, and then they get all types of imaging. They get high density EEGs or scalp EEGs for a full week, 24/7, where we also get video recordings. We do fMRI, diffusion weighted imaging. We do PET scanning, structural scanning. We do everything. And we do as much as we can, just so we have multiple modalities to basically find where the seizure is coming from, so we can come up with the best treatment plan for the patient. Mm-hmm.
That's very important. And I cannot not to ask this question because I worked in functional mapping for epilepsy surgery. And I'm very curious what functional mapping techniques is your hospital using to evaluate critically important functions like language and motor function in pediatric patients, because that's a very important population that usual methods do not always work for.
Yeah, no, so I'm not in the clinical aspect where I do the functional mapping as well, but our team does do a lot of the functional mapping. So we do a lot of SEEG where we do functional mapping, but we also started using TMS as well, where we try to find the language zones or the motor zones. But TMS only works if the patient can read certain sentences or if they can sit still for a certain amount. We actually also use fMRI for functional mapping. Mm-hmm. Our neuroscientist that works in the radiology department, he developed this amazing algorithm where they do vision, motor, hearing, so Broca and Wernicke, all in one algorithm. And it beautifully and reliably shows the areas that are related to those functions. And since we have all the different modalities, so we do SEEG, we do the TMS, and we do the fMRI, and we also have the neuropsychologists that help with functional mapping as well. All those modalities help us with identifying where these critical areas is that we need to avoid for surgery.
I would love to talk to this neuroscientist who is working in the radiology department, also share this, because it's another application, another area where our listeners can find themselves working in the future.
For sure.
Yes, and where do you come in? Where does your work come in and help the program and help the patient?
That is a great question. So we have a large team of neuropsychologists, neurologists, neurosurgeons, and I'm actually the first research scientist on our team. They found that they had so much data to work with for a clinical purpose, and they wanted to hire a researcher to dive into the nitty-gritty, to find certain patterns, to look at different outcomes, and also to look into rare diseases within epilepsy. And additionally, my background comes from connectomics. So I used to do a lot of white matter tracking in the brain. And when I applied for this job, they thought that was super interesting. And they created a job based on that. So I can map white matter fibers. So basically, how the brain is connected in kids with epilepsy, because epilepsy is a network disorder. So right now, I'm doing a couple of studies where I look at differences in white matter connections, and they're still ongoing. So I don't have a lot of results yet. But yeah, so I'm basically looking at how these networks are aberrant or different from a kid that does not have epilepsy.
And how does your usual day look like?
That is a good question because every day is different, right? And that's the cool thing about being a scientist or coming from a PhD background is that no day is the same. So actually right now I've been super active in a consortium called the Pediatric Epilepsy Research Consortium. And this is a consortium with over 70 epilepsy programs within the US. And we all work together to find or to help find methods to best treat patients. And we do research on the data. We combine our data and we help each other out. So right now we're actually hosting the annual meeting for them next month. And these couple days I've been super busy prepping for the meeting and organizing the event itself. But so every day differs. So whenever I have weeks where I focus on my research, where I do coding and analysis, or I make figures. There's weeks where I do a lot of writing. There's weeks where I'm working on grant applications, or I help with writing for clinical trials. And this week, for example, I'm working on planning for the annual meeting.
That is absolutely amazing. And you just mentioned your background. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that. And how did you get to this place where you are doing all these amazing things?
Yes, of course. So actually, my background is not very traditional. I'm originally from the Netherlands and I grew up in Curacao, a little Caribbean island. And after I did my high school on the island, there's not a lot of opportunities for university afterwards. So I actually moved back to Holland, where I got a position in medical school. So I did 1 year of medical school in Holland, and I absolutely love medical school. I thought it was amazing. However, it didn't fit for me. I thought it was really cool, but it was just not really for me. So I actually stopped medical school. I dropped out. I was working on the side, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I applied for universities in the United States just because it was closer to Curacao, where I grew up. And I got into the University of Miami, where I took some psychology classes and some research methods classes. And something just clicked. Something clicked, and I thought, this is it. I love research writing. I love statistics. I love the whole investigation method. So I switched everything over and I wanted to do a PhD after my undergrad. And I started studying for the GRE and everything. And yeah, that's how I got to where I'm now. I ended up applying for multiple schools after my undergrad at UM. I took some neuroscience classes, but they have a waitlist there for the neuroscience major. So I majored in psychology with some neuroscience classes. And then I got a spot in a neuroscience lab under Dr. Allen at Florida International University. That was incredible. My whole experience there was incredible. And even though that is an animal lab, so the lab over there does a lot of rodent research and pig research, I really wanted to do human neuroimaging. And my mentor was very okay with that and very supportive. So we actually got a second mentor for me that could help me with the coding and analysis for the human neuroimaging. And then my main mentor would help me with the whole scientific process and through my whole PhD. So as we were going through that, we were focusing on memory systems and Alzheimer's disease, actually, very different from what I'm doing now. But basically, I was looking at connections in the brain and how they were different in people with Alzheimer's disease and who had memory loss. A little bit different background, but the methodology was the same. I was using the same methods. I was using diffusion weighted imaging, structural MRI, and fMRI. So basically, I apply all the techniques that I learned during my PhD right now at my current job. I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, I think it's very inspiring for people in psychology. Actually, I teach at the Department of Psychology at the University of North Florida.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yes, yes. And of course, we have psychologists who want to find their way, and many of them are interested in more clinical type of positions. And so I think your background is very relevant and your story is very relevant to many of the students. And my question is, what do you think helped you being in psychology with the psychology major to get into the clinical role like you have now, scientists?
I think you just have to have a passion for it. My undergrad was in psychology, and my PhD was in, even though it was in neuroscience, it was still in the psychology department. And I was always very passionate about everything medical related. So I remember in my dissertation defense, one of my committee members asked me, "What is your dream job?" I told her, I said, "I want to do exactly what I've been doing here, but I want to do it in a translational setting. So I want to do it in a medical setting." I think with whatever you're studying in psychology or in neuroscience, as long as you have a passion for medicine, you can dive into a medical field. I think anyone with a scientific background, anyone with a PhD can help out in a clinical field. If you know how to do scientific research, if you're good at scientific writing, you have something to offer in a clinical field. So you don't even have to be a research scientist. You can become a grant writer, you can become a medical writer, you can help out with data analysis, you can become a biostatistician. There are so many different roles you can do in a medical setting, but all you have to be is passionate about the translational role and how it affects patients directly. Day to day, I'm always thinking of what are the different subgroups within epilepsy? How can we better these patients? So, what are things that are still unknown? What are things we still need to investigate? What are gaps in the current literature or in the current knowledge? And that's where I focus my research on. So, I think if you have that passion and if you have that interest in learning, then anyone can dive into the clinical realm.
And speaking about that, what are those things that are still unknown in the field of epilepsy? Where do you think people should focus their effort, at least at this present moment?
There's actually a lot of gaps in the field right now. There's a really big group of scientists, either physician scientists or PhD scientists, that are working on incredible research. So there's a big conference every year in December called the AES, the American Epilepsy Society. And every time I go there, there's an incredible amount of research being done, from high level connectomics to outcome research to multi center research. A lot of teams are working on research. However, there's still a lot unknown, as a lot of medical fields, right? There's a lot of rare diseases that need more looking into. And mainly this is because there's just not enough patients that we can look into. So there's only a couple of patients because it's so rare. I think it might be helpful if centers combine their data and look at outcomes or look at what's working for their patients. That's why consortiums like the Pediatric Epilepsy Research Consortium is great, because they work together to help out rare diseases and to do research on rare diseases. Other things that a lot of people are now newly doing research on are new technologies. So, for example, one of the newer technologies is called neuromodulation. So you have RNS, which stands for responsive neurostimulation, or VNS, which is vagus nerve stimulation. Those are wonderful newer methods that are being used in epilepsy, and they are incredible. They're showing incredible gains in the field, but there are still some gaps that are unknown. So one of my studies is actually focusing on the white matter connectivity in RNS and how it relates to when patients respond to it versus when they don't respond to it. A lot of people are doing research on it, but the more the merrier, right? If we can all work together on research, if we can collaborate with different institutions on these type of research projects and combine our data, that is just incredible.
Yes, it is incredible. And we have those new modalities that we can use and to help patients. And we can utilize research to identify those gaps that still exist in understanding the mechanism behind the work of those methods and investigate it to improve the outcomes that those methods produce. It's still work in progress. We would like to have better outcomes with those new methodologies.
For sure, yes. And also, there's a lot of comorbidities in the disease. Often, people with epilepsy might also have autism, or they might have ADHD or other types of comorbidities. Research focusing on those type of interactions or comorbidities is also really important. And I know people are working on it, but just because it's so complex, it's still being investigated. But yeah, it's incredible what's being done in the field right now. But of course, in research, there's always gaps here and there. And that means more opportunity for scientists like myself to investigate more.
Yes, absolutely. And my next question is about the connectomics. Like you said, we have responsive stimulation that are new methods for treating epilepsy or to improving patients' lives. However, the methods like connectomics are also new. So you are using a new method for relatively new treatment methodologies. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What is connectomics about? And then how we can apply this type of research for patients with epilepsy.
Yes, of course. Yeah. So connectomics basically is measuring the white matter tracks in the brain. In the brain, you have neurons that talk to one another. And a neuron has an axon, which has myelin around it, which is a fatty substance. And that can be imaged in the brain as white matter. So the white matter in the brain is on the inside, and the gray matter in the brain is on the outside. And what's really interesting is because you have this fatty substance around the axon, you can basically trace how the water molecules move along axons. Since water doesn't go through fat, it can only go along fat. So you can basically measure how the water molecules go along these axons. And you can model that, and you can measure how thick these communication fibers are in the brain. And then you can compare diseased brains or people that have abnormal brains compared to healthy brains. For example, if I go back to my previous research where I was looking at Alzheimer's, there were smaller axons and smaller fiber bundles compared to healthier brains. Even when you're aging, the bundles get smaller and smaller and smaller a little bit. But with Alzheimer's, they get smaller faster. You can basically look at these fiber bundles, these communication cells in the brain, and how many cells are communicating. You can't actually say how many cells, but you can just see how thick the bundles are and compare that from a diseased group to a healthy group. And then you can model that and compare that with outcomes, right? So if you're looking at, for example, a medication or a treatment, you can see, okay, we have a treatment. These people are responding to the treatment, these people are not responding to the treatment. Could it have something to do with their fiber bundles? Could it have something to do with the organization of how these neurons are organized in the brain or not? That is one way you can look at it in the brain.
Maybe you can tell more about what you are doing, your research on connectomics in responsive stimulation.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. I'm looking actually at pediatric patients that get an RNS implanted in their thalamus. And I'm looking specifically at where the RNS is implanted in the central median nucleus of the thalamus. So I'm going to explain a little bit first what an RNS is, and then I'll dive into what I'm studying. So an RNS is basically a little machine that gets put right under the skull, and then we have one electrode or two electrodes or an electrode and a strip. And an electrode gets put into the brain. And what it can do is it can measure the brain activity. And if it starts noticing that there's abnormal brain activity, it can respond and it can give stimulation to basically tell the brain to go back to normal. And it's really cool. So it's a closed loop. I'm specifically looking at patients that have the implant in either both thalamus or in one thalamus. And I'm looking at the central median nucleus. With RNS, about 50 to 60% of the people are responders or they're not responders. And we don't really know why. My theory is that if there are connections from the thalamus to areas where the seizure starts, and if those connections are strong, there's more communication between those regions. If there is less connection, so if there's less communication, they might be less likely to be a responder. So I think there's more communication between seizure onset zone and the thalamus. They're more likely to be a responder. If there's a thinner bundle, so thinner white matter connectivity between the seizure onset zone and the thalamus, they're less likely to be a responder.
Mhm.
This study is still ongoing. We have a pretty low end right now, so we're still waiting until we get the sample up because you need to have a large sample size for a study like this. And we're actually also talking about doing some multi-center collaborations, and that way we can do a full research study on that.
Very exciting. We'll be on a lookout for the results of this study.
Mhm.
Can you tell a little bit more about the technical details of this process? Because you mentioned that you are working with DTI, MRI, and fMRI. So, what type of a combination do you create? How do you combine all those three methods in one research, in one study?
Yeah, so for this study, we actually use diffusion weighted imaging and structural imaging. First, we do a lot of pre-processing. So we clean the data. And the first thing I need to do is I need to segment the brain. So I use this software called FreeSurfer, where I automatically segment the brain into all its neuroanatomical segments, right? So you have all the different gyri, you have all the different subcortical structures like the thalamus, the hippocampus, the amygdala. And this software beautifully will tell you where the boundaries are of all these areas. And then I also need to pre-process diffusion weighted imaging. I just need to clean the data so we can properly use it. After that, I use a software called FSL, and that's what I use for my probabilistic tractography. So basically, what I do is I use the central median nucleus of the thalamus as a seed. And then what it does is it sends out different random tracks all around the brain. And then it measures how often it ends up in all the different targets in the brain. You can tell the software what you want the targets to be, but I often have a very specific set of targets, which are the seizure onset zones of that specific patient. And those specific seizure onset zones then fall in a region that then FreeSurfer tells me in what region it is. So, for example, it can be in the frontal pole or it can be in the superior temporal gyrus. And then basically, I measure how often the random walks from the thalamus end up in that specific target. And then we can compare that with healthy individuals to see if that's either higher or if it's the same or if it's lower.
What is the most challenging part of this process?
Oh, been doing it for so long that I absolutely love doing it. I think the most challenging part is doing all the coding. Often, some of my analyses take 5 days to run per patient. And if there's one issue with the code, if I put a comma somewhere where it's not supposed to be, it will crash and I will have to redo it all again. So it's just very time consuming. But honestly, I love this process a lot. So I think it's a really cool research study and I think it's a really cool method to use. But I think it's time consuming and the coding part is very hard to learn. So the learning curve for that is pretty high.
And where does this coding part come in? Because you're already using several software packages. You mentioned Free Surfer, you mentioned FSL. Where is this coding needed?
That's a good question. For some of the softwares, you can use a GUI, so you can just click buttons and use the GUI that way. But to make it more streamlined, and if you do batch processing, so if you have multiple subjects or multiple runs and you want them having running overnight, you can create a script where you can basically tell the computer what to do. And instead of using all the buttons, you write everything in code yourself. That's how I was learned to do it in my PhD. And that way you can also choose every single parameter and you don't let it up to the software to choose the parameters for you. And you have full control over the entire research study. That's where the coding comes in. And the scripts can be pretty long sometimes. So I mainly use Python and Jupyter notebooks. So sometimes they can be pages and pages long. But I just like to work with that and I like to put everything in scripts rather than using the GUIs because then if something crashes, you can have a script run in the background. Whereas with the GUI always needs to be active. So I prefer scripts over a GUI most of the time.
Yeah. And you mentioned that it was a steep curve for you to learn coding. Can you elaborate more on this process? How long did it take? What were the biggest hurdles on this path? Because many of psychology students, they're not really well versed in coding.
Mm-hmm.
This starts to change, but still it's an issue. So I think it would be great for you to share with them your experience, which will encourage them also to do similar things. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I actually, when I started my PhD, I had zero coding experience. Absolutely. I started from scratch. I didn't know where to start. My main mentor did MATLAB. So his coding was in MATLAB. And my second mentor, his coding was in Python. Initially, I learned a little bit of both. And I looked online for a couple of coding classes, and I took one coding class at FIU as well. And I found one class actually that's amazing. It's on edx.org. It's called Python for Data Science, and it teaches you everything, all the basics on how to use Python, and it's also free for everyone. That was for me the most helpful. It teaches you how to use Jupyter notebooks, how to make basic filters for an image. So it made you practice on fun things like how to make a filter for a photo or how to do basic math. That definitely helped. But from going from a smaller coding project to a large fMRI project was a little bit tough. So I watched a lot of YouTube and I asked a lot of questions on Stack Overflow. So I'm very grateful for all the people on Stack Overflow that always answered all my questions. And I do love that the neuroscience community always helps each other out. Everyone always responds to each other and everyone's always open to helping each other. So that was definitely a big win.
How many years did it take for you to really start feeling comfortable with coding?
I was actually pretty slow at it. My peers, it took them about 6 months to a year, or probably 6 months for them. I think it was more like a year and a half, 2 years for me, but I was very slow at it. I understood the concepts way slower, but now I absolutely love it. So if someone is listening to this and they are doing their undergraduate, try to do a class online. Find a free class, take a class in your university, do a workshop. I highly recommend it if you want to go into any scientific field. and try to do some fun things like make a little game or make a filter for a photo or just with some math. I really wish I did that in my undergrad. I just didn't know I was going to need coding, so I was never exposed to it.
We will tell our students right now that they need coding and let's get involved in some fun projects that you can do and really ease your way into this field, into coding. What was the most challenging part of learning for you?
Of learning how to code, I think just understanding that it was a different language. I think it's similar as if you were learning another symbol language. I would say like learning Chinese or learning a totally different language that uses different letters and different rules. I think just understanding the rules and understanding the symbols and knowing when to use what, that was for me the hardest. But I think the best thing to learn is just to practice, make the mistakes, practice, start small. The more exposure you get, the faster you're going to grasp it. Don't think you're going to be a pro within a month. Just learn the basics, and slowly you're going to start recognizing things. Slowly you're going to start learning all the rules. And then once you start learning those, it starts becoming really fun. So I highly recommend just starting slow, but exposing yourself as much as you can to it.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a great suggestion. You also mentioned Stack Overflow. What is this? You mentioned that it's a community of people that can help each other. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, of course. So Stack Overflow basically is a website where you can post your questions if you have any software or code questions, and people often respond right away to it. It's a big community of coders, gamers, neuroscientists, other type of scientists. It's just a big community of people that help out. I'm sure there's other fields on there as well, but just because I was involved in the neuroscience and the coding field, that's mainly where I posted my questions. But it was really, really helpful. And don't be shy to post your questions there, because often I was looking for questions and they weren't on there. And I just was too shy to ask. But then after a while, I just started posting my questions and people were very helpful. And I'm sure someone else is going to have the same question later on. So feel free to just post your questions there. There are no silly questions, and it's going to help someone in the future.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And from the position where you are now, what advice can you give in terms of developing skills for psychology undergrads who are planning their careers in the clinical field like you?
I love this question. Often, when people do their undergrad, they think, okay, I need to get good grades, I need to get some research experience, and that's it, right? But I think it's way more than that. So, yes, you do need good grades. And if you can, try to get some research experience, try to volunteer in a lab, try to see if you can shadow someone. But I also think there's other skills you can obtain that are outside of that. So, one of them is networking. People probably talk about that a lot, and I slept on it. I did not know how important networking was until later on in my career. And it might seem very scary, but it wasn't scary at all. So now every time I go to a conference, I look up someone that I might idolize, or I think, wow, this is an amazing researcher or clinician. And I send them an email and I ask, hey, can I buy you a coffee? And can I ask you two questions? And every single time they say, I would love to. Thank you so much. And I'm always like very shocked, but it's wonderful. And then we grab coffee and I ask them some questions and they always give me inspiring answers. It's really helped me through my career. So, my biggest tip would be don't be scared to network. Talk to people you find inspirational, and send them an email. If you're going to go to a conference, if that person is going to be a speaker there, send them an email, ask them if you can buy them a cup of coffee. Worst case they can do is they just don't reply, and that is totally fine. That is nothing personal. They probably get a lot of emails, so they might have just not seen it. But if you don't ask, you're never going to get the opportunity. So definitely just go out of your comfort zone and network a little bit. Another thing that really helped me was art. It's actually a very different one. So I actually did my minor in art in undergrad. And because I was very into art, now I do a lot of medical illustrations and I absolutely love it. So I think for scientific communication, it's very important to be able to communicate your science in very simple terms or in pretty pictures. So if you have a good method of visualizing your data, so for example, a beautiful pie graph or a bar graph, or if you can make a beautiful vector image of your story, your scientific story, I think those are great assets for your scientific career or for your scientific communication career. Those were very helpful for me in my career as well.
Yes, wonderful tips. Absolutely. And how you can use all your background. Never dismiss something that you learned or the skills that you've
For
developed.
sure.
How you're using now your art background here. Yes, that's beautiful. And can you now tell a little bit more about how did you get this clinical neuroscience position? How did it happen?
Yes, okay, that was actually a really cool story. Before I graduated with my PhD, I was a little unsure what to do because in my field, it was very traditional. Everyone does a postdoc, everyone goes to the path of becoming PI at a university where they start their own labs. And that was just not for me. I highly respect all the PIs and all the postdocs, but that was just not the path that I wanted to take. So I was exploring on my own what else was out there. And it's incredible how many jobs are out there that are not the traditional PI route. So I was looking at different jobs such as medical science liaison jobs, medical writer jobs, statistician jobs. However, I still had the itch of wanting to keep doing research. So I was also looking at research scientist jobs. So either in a hospital setting or in industry, so in pharmaceutical companies or biotechnology companies. But my ideal would be doing a research scientist job in medicine. So I looked left and right. I was looking on LinkedIn and Indeed and everywhere. And actually, I saw a job at Nicklaus Children's Hospital that was not my current job. It was a different job. And I thought, this is not really a job I have the skill set for. But you know what? Let me just apply. Let me just apply. Worst case, they just don't give me an interview, and that is fine. So I applied for this job and I got an interview. So I prepped for the interview and I had a whole timeline of how I was going to learn all the tricks and all the skills for that specific job. And during the interview, they said, "Oh, that job has been filled. We actually want to create a position based on your resume and based on your skill set." That was incredible. They just came across my resume and they thought, wow, like she has a background in connectomics. We could use a research scientist doing connectomics type research in her program. Let's create a position for her. That's basically how I got this job, which is incredible because the job didn't exist. I didn't apply for this job, but we just ended up meeting in the same space. And that's how I ended up here. I guess what I've learned from that is now in the future, if I were to give a tip to someone applying for jobs, I would email departments you would want to work in. So I would send emails to either hospitals or programs or companies and send them your CV and ask them if they're looking for whatever position you're looking for, a research scientist job, and highlight your skills. Don't send a super long email, just send a couple of bullet points of your best skills. And who knows, maybe you might be the perfect fit for what they secretly were looking for. That was very special.
It is very special, and that's a great tip. And also, I think another learning from this that don't discard opportunities even if you see that your skill set is not matching what they're looking for.
Yes, 100%. That's really something I've learned as well. And I see in the data, especially for females, we often apply for jobs when we have either all the skill sets or we have all the skill set plus some. So don't be scared. If you have a couple of the skills, apply. Worst case, you just don't get the job, and that is fine. But don't be scared. Just apply. Put yourself out there.
Yeah, great tip. Thank you so much. Also, you mentioned contacting different centers and inquiring about the job opportunities, how do you approach this process? Do you have a standard email and resume that you are sending to all the institutions, or you have more individualized approach to every center? How do you usually handle that?
Since I haven't done that because of my, like the way I got my job, but if I were to do something like that, I would definitely personalize it. I would want to know for myself why I would want to work there. If I hypothetically would apply for a department that was treating patients with Parkinson's or patients with Alzheimer's, or in this case, patients with epilepsy, I would look up what the program is doing. Everything is online nowadays. All the physicians are online. All the what they're doing are online. The phase 1 studies are online. All the steps they're taking are online. And research what they're doing, what it entails. It's really incredible what these programs are doing, and see how you can be of value to that program. See where your skill set comes in. So, for example, for me, my skill set in connectomics research could definitely help with, the phase 1's evaluations and the neuroimaging, doing research on all that data. But if you have another skill set that for another type of disease, if you want to study, I don't know, something in a different field, definitely look up what they're doing and if you match with that department and highlight your skill set.
Yes. And what do you think was the main skill set that helped you to get this position? What attracted the employer to you?
I think for me, it was the connectomics background because I was looking at the white matter connections in the brain. And since epilepsy is a network disorder, the people that interviewed me, they thought that would be a great fit. And that was incredible because epilepsy is a network disorder. So I'm very blessed that I get to research the network characteristics in the MRIs of patients with epilepsy. For me, it was connectomics. Connectomics could also be applicable to, for example, aging or any type of neurological disorder. However, if I were to apply to like a foot doctor, a department where they treat feet or legs or anything ortho, that might not be as applicable because I do brain connectomics. That's not going to be super applicable for anything ortho. So I would find a department that matches your skill set. And yeah, for me, it was connectomics.
Yes, thank you. And what are the career growth opportunities in this type of positions? What would be the next step that you can take or position that you can achieve stepping from where you are now?
That's a great question. Since I was the first research scientist, we're actually slowly starting to build a research team in the Brain Institute. We do have a wonderful research institute within our hospital, and they are incredible. They help with all the clinical trials, and they have a large group of people, including biostatisticians, clinical coordinators, research coordinators. But for my job in particular, we are building a little research group within here. So the first thing I wanted to do is build the infrastructure on having the opportunity for students to be able to come and volunteer with us. I developed an internship where students from all levels, so we've had high school students, we've had undergraduate students. Right now, we have a medical student and a PsyD student that are volunteering with us, where they get research exposure and they learn a lot about research and they get papers and posters out of it, and they learn a lot about research. So that was the first step for me, is to develop an educational internship for the students. In the long run, we're building our team. So we're going to hire postdocs, and the first step is for us is going to be a database specialist. So we're going to have someone that's going to build us a beautiful big database and manage that. And then slowly, once we have a bigger team, there needs to be a manager, there needs to be a director. So those are areas of growth where someone like me could potentially go.
Yes, yeah, that is amazing what you created because students really need this clinical exposure opportunity to learn, and you are creating those opportunities for them. So, I'm sure that they're asking lots of questions and regarding the future opportunities, regarding the career development. What are the most common questions they ask?
I think a lot of the questions are, how do I get to where you are now?
Yes.
What do I need to do to get to where you are now? And for everyone, that's different. But I think one of them is get some research experience if you can, which is hard because there's only a couple of labs available at every university. But think outside of the box. Apply for research labs at hospitals. You can just email people that are in your region that are doing research, or go into a different department, ask them if you can volunteer there or if you can have a research assistant job there. And I think that's really important to get some form of research exposure.
And what tendencies do you notice where young minds want to implement their skills as they are planning their future careers?
I think a lot of students want to go into different fields. I had students that were interns with our hospital. Some of them wanted to go into the MD route and they wanted to do an MD after they wanted to become a medical doctor. And one of the students that was an undergrad when she was an intern with me, she just got accepted to her PhD program. So she is starting her PhD in August. Another student that's working with me is doing her PsyD right now, and she wants to be a neuropsychologist in a children's hospital. There's a lot of different areas that the students want to go in, which is incredible.
Do you see also this shift towards finding more industry, including clinical industry type of jobs, instead of pursuing the path of the PI, the one that you mentioned after completing a postdoc? Yeah, so going directly from PhD to industry.
Slowly, that is becoming more known. When I was in my PhD, I did not know anything about that. So, actually, when I applied for this job, I also got a wonderful offer for a medical science liaison job for a pet company, an incredible company. And it was a very hard decision because that company was amazing as well. But after I started doing my research, I started talking a lot about it on Instagram and I started talking a lot about it to my peers and to other students. And I think it's becoming more known that there's more jobs out there than just a traditional PI route. And I think more students are opting in on that, right? So even with the neuroscience PhD, you can work for Google, you can work for NASA, you can even become an astronaut. I did not know that. That's really cool. But people are slowly catching on that there's all these other opportunities out there that are not just the traditional PI route. And slowly, more knowledge is coming out. And thanks to social media and LinkedIn, people are becoming more aware of it. And of course, thanks to your podcast as well, because you're sharing so much knowledge about it. I think definitely a lot of people are getting more information on it as long as we keep sharing. I think that's incredible.
Yes. And I actually was in a similar situation as you. I was the first clinical research scientist hired by epilepsy surgery program, comprehensive epilepsy surgery program. And I understand those growing pains were really, it's the first position. People really don't know what is it all about, but slowly you are figuring out, and then the research gets built around it, and it becomes more and more complex, and people are joining and creating more opportunities for other people to join.
My program has been so supportive of everything research. That has just been incredible. They're seeing the value in research. They're seeing the importance in research. They're seeing the importance for the patients directly. And I think if you have the support of your peers and of your team, I think that's incredible. And I work super closely with the physicians and with the neuropsychologists and the neurosurgeons, and just working as a big team. For me, that's what it's all about. I don't want to work in a silo. I want to work all together. And they share their clinical knowledge, and I share my research knowledge, and we all work together.
That's an incredible opportunity to really collaborate with specialists from absolutely different fields, but there is one thing that unites all of them: patients and their outcomes and improving their lives, which is beautiful. Yes, to unite all under one goal to support and help patients.
100%.
Yes. And my next question is about your experience in seeing all other opportunities while you were applying, while you were researching, or you even were offered this medicine liaison job. And you mentioned already quite a few jobs that are also available in this more clinical domain, clinical industry. Maybe you can provide just a brief overview of what our listeners can be looking at as they're planning their future career.
Yeah, of course. So you can kind of split it up in if you want to keep doing research yourself or if you don't want to keep doing research yourself. I wanted to keep doing research. So that's why I ended up choosing this job and I'm very happy with my current role. And you also have other types of research scientist job where you can work at a bench where you can do animal research or you can do more wet lab research, but it also falls under the research scientist role. It's just a little bit different than mine because mine is all on the computer. But you also have jobs where you work with the research scientist where you can do the writing, for example. So one of them is a medical writer where you are doing all of the writing. So you write up the protocols, you write up the IRBs, you write up the manuscripts, the papers, you help write for posters. You can become a medical illustrator. So if you are interested in art and you want to make figures for papers or scientific illustrations, then that can be a whole job in its own. You can become a medical science liaison. So that is when you work for an industry company and you are the liaison between a hospital doing research and the company. So you're not in sales, but you are the knowledge base between the hospital doing the research or the researcher and the company. And those type of jobs are incredible as well. It's a lot of travel. So you travel a lot to all the different sites, to all the different hospitals, and you go to all the different conferences where you share all your knowledge about the product, but also about the disease that the product is made for. Those type of jobs are incredible as well. You can also become a data analyst or a data scientist or a biostatistician. Those three jobs basically fall within the data field where either you can work within science, where you work in data analysis for a scientific project, or you can do data analysis for a hospital or for a company or for something else, for operations. You can go into different directions in that as well.
And where those who want to get into position like yours can start searching for opportunities. Of course, you already mentioned that they can directly approach certain centers. What are other ways for them to look for positions like this?
I actually found my position on LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is a great way to find new positions, especially if you're early. And what I normally also do is whenever I find a position on LinkedIn, I also try to email the person that is recruiting and ask them questions about the position per email.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also other websites, Glassdoor, Indeed, that have positions available as well. So applying for positions is a lot of work. You can't just send one application to all different positions. You have to customize your application per different position and make sure this is something you really want. So you can't do 10 applications a day. You have to do maybe one a day, maybe one each other day. It's a lot of work, but I do think that makes you really think about, do I really want this job? Am I a really good fit for this job? Can I see myself working here for a long time? So I do think it's worth the effort of researching what the company's about, what their values are, what their mission is. But yeah, websites like Indeed, LinkedIn, and Glassdoor have a lot of opportunities available.
Thank you so much for mentioning that you cannot just send one application everywhere, which sometimes people are doing. You really need to look into the company, do your research, and then prepare customized application for that particular position. And another question that people are asking, whom should I contact? You mentioned that you would contact a recruiter. Would you contact a manager? Would you also contact a team? Who would be the best point of contact in this type of situations?
That's a good question, and I might not have the perfect answer. Sometimes on LinkedIn, if it's a really big company, there might be a recruiting company that they've hired to recruit for. You can even just go on the company's website and see if they have an HR email available, or you can just contact the recruiter directly on LinkedIn. But if it's for a specific program, you can look online, see if you can find the program director and email the program director directly and show your interest for the role, say you've applied, share your CV in the email as well, and just make it short and sweet because not a lot of people have time to read long emails. They're going to have a couple seconds to glance at it. So keep it very short, put your most important things up front, put your skills in short bullet points. And yeah, if it's for a program, you can find the emails online for the directors. Otherwise, just ask the recruiter on LinkedIn.
Those are great suggestions. And do you have any tips how to prepare for the interview? How to handle it?
That's a good question. I actually love interviews. I know everyone gets nervous, but just be yourself. I think don't make up questions that are not true and you think they want to hear certain things. First of all, you have to do your research in the company. Look at their values, look at their mission, look at what they stand for. Think about your own values, think about what you want to do and put your own twist on it. See how you connect to that, to their values, see how you connect to their mission. Look on their website and see what they're doing and see how you can add value to their program. See how you can add value to whatever they're already doing. Why do they need to hire you? Because if you're, for example, a biostatistician or you're looking for a biostatistician job and you say, oh, I'm great at stats, that might not be enough because everyone who's applying might be great at stats. So give them an example of paper that you've worked on, showing off your sophisticated stats writing, or tell them a story about how you dealt with a difficult situation where you were stuck with your data and how you worked with it. So definitely prepare some items that are going to be important for the interview and how you can provide value to that company.
Yes, that I think is very important to keep in mind how to stand out from other applicants. What you can do to really stand out, because, like you said, many people have statistics skills.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think in general helps a person to stand out to the interviewers, to the committee?
I think just be yourself. I feel like it's really important to be yourself. Every time, a lot of people, when they do an interview, they get nervous and they want to be a professional, whatever they're looking for. But talk about your hobbies, talk about who you are. So I remember in my interview for the hospital, we were talking about scuba diving because I love scuba diving. And that has nothing to do with the job, but what shows off your personality a little bit. So I think it's important to just be yourself and show off your personality a little bit in a good way, in a positive light, but keep it focused on the job as much as possible, but show off a little bit here and there of what you do outside of work. I think it's important for jobs to see that you do other things as well, that you have hobbies and you do other things outside of work. So it's totally okay to talk about that briefly as well. And other than that, if you have an interesting story from your past or your background that ties into the job, that is great too. So, for example, my non traditional story of how I did med school and then I went to the PhD, that is very different than what people normally get. That definitely helps being remembered. Even though I'm not doing MD anymore, I'm doing my PhD, people still remember, oh, she started in medicine, but then she switched to research. Interesting. But it makes me stand out.
It is interesting indeed, because this question comes up to quite a few people who are entering medical school and they're still thinking, should I go into research? And we had a very interesting podcast with the PhD, Sarah Wandel, who wanted to be a medical doctor. She actually became an engineer, neural engineer. And then she had a twin sister who wanted to be an engineer and to have PhD and work with neuro, but actually she became a medical doctor.
Oh, that's incredible. That's incredible.
What motivated you first to go into MD and then switch your direction into research?
In Europe, you go to medical school when you're 18. So you're very young when you go to medical school.
Mhm.
And it's a little bit different than in the United States because in Europe, you get in based on a lottery system. And the higher your average grade is, the more likely it is for you to get in. When I was almost 18, I was very lucky and I got into medical school. I always loved sciences and I always loved everything biology related, but I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do. But I was also so young, right? I was almost 18. I didn't know it yet, but I got into medical school. So I had to take that opportunity. But then while I was in medical school, although I loved it, I love medical school, it just wasn't the right fit for me. So that's when I dropped out and I stopped, but I still love medicine. There was still something tying me to it. So when I did my undergrad at University of Miami,
Mhm.
again, I was still unsure what I wanted to do. So I did pre-med. And then when I started taking the research methods courses and statistics and neuroscience and psychology, that's when it clicked. That's when it clicked that this is what I want to do. I want to do research. I want to do research in neuroscience and psychology, and especially memory. That's where I started in my PhD. And that's just how it went. I kind of just rolled into it.
Yeah, so there was still this interest in medical field, just you wanted to approach it from a different angle.
Exactly.
Not hands-on treatment of patients, but a different approach to help them with the research and that maybe can provide more global support, yes, global perspective. And now at your institution at this moment, but also as people get to know about your research through your publications, through your work, this can be implemented on a more global scale at different other places.
Exactly. Like even right now in my programs, I do research,
Mhm.
but I also have some clinical duties that I help with. So, for example, we do some connectomics for our TMS machine, or we do some investigation for our TMS machine. And then I pre process the data for the MD so they can use it on the TMS machine. Or I do some subtractions of certain scans. So we have SPECT and PET scans. I could just make a quick little pipeline where I subtract two scans from each other, and I help out with those kind of duties as well. Although my job is 99% focused on research, I do love helping out in clinical domains wherever I can as well. Another example is there's this beautiful study called the MELT study. This is a study done in, I believe it was in England, where they developed a pipeline how you can identify focal cortical dysplasia in T1 scans and MRI scans. Now, I'm very interested in implementing that for our program as well. And of course, you need all the code and all the Jupyter notebooks for that to implement that. So that's next on my list after the big meeting. I want to start implementing that for our physicians to use as well. Even though that's not for me research, that would be something clinical we can incorporate into our clinical pipeline.
Yeah, so you're supporting clinical work, clinical operations as well. That is amazing. What would be the most exciting part of being a clinical research scientist for you?
I think seeing the kids every day. So since I work remote a couple days a week, technically my job can be 100% remote, but I love going into the hospital. And my office is literally next to the lobby of the Brain Institute. So just walking through the hospital, everything is very colorful and you see all the kids and from babies till 18s, seeing the kids every day just reminds you of your why. Why are you doing this? Why is this important? So even on days when you're tired or if you're not having an inspirational day, then if you see the kids, that's why you're doing it. This is who you're doing it for. And that really helps me wanting to succeed in my projects. And this is really inspiring me to want to do more projects and collaborate and all the things. I think that's the most beautiful thing working in a hospital with kids.
It is. And what is the most challenging part of this process of being clinical research scientist?
I think setting up things so everything works for coding, right? So I had to set up computers in a way that everything had to be regulated to be very HIPAA compliant with everything, and everything is very protected, which is, of course, amazing. But that made it a little bit harder to set up all the softwares and all the code. And sometimes things break just because everything just needs to be protected. So that was a little bit of a hurdle to set up. But once it's set up and once it's working, then it's great. But just the onboarding was a little hard.
Thank you. And can you provide us more global perspective of where the field of pediatric epilepsy is heading and what can be a potential role of more clinical research scientists joining research centers, pediatric research centers, and contributing to them?
Yeah, so I think we're definitely heading into a direction where centers are collaborating with each other because we are finding that there's more and more rare diseases. So even if you look at the papers looking at all the genetic markers in epilepsy, every couple of years there's more genetic markers being found and more and more and more. So more research is needed on those genetic markers every time they're discovered. Since a lot of these rare diseases are being found, more centers are working together. And what I also love is that all the centers are opening up to having research scientists and having PhDs hand in hand work with the MDs. So I feel like there's a lot of opportunities for scientists to work in these fields alongside the neurosurgeons, the physicians, and the neuropsychologists to do research all together as a team. That's what I really love about it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And our podcast is called Neurocareers, Doing the Impossible. Maybe you can recall something that you thought of being impossible in your career, in your research, but you proved it to be possible. And how did you do it?
Can it be outside of my career or does it have to be in the career?
It can be outside of your career. Absolutely.
Okay. One of my bucket list items that I always wanted to do, but I thought I could never do, was to climb Kilimanjaro. And I climbed Kilimanjaro by myself with help of a guide and a team of porters. That was a big milestone for me to climb a mountain like that a couple years ago. So, yeah, after that, I thought, okay, anything is possible.
That is incredible. Why? Why to climb Kilimanjaro?
I just wanted to prove myself that I could do it.
Mhm.
But other than that, I also think getting your PhD is so hard. I think doing research itself, it's difficult because you have to be okay with failure. Sometimes your experiments don't work out, and that is totally okay. But just to keep going and keep going and keep going during your PhD is incredible. And when you reach the end of it and you graduate, that feeling is just amazing. So I feel like obtaining a PhD was also one of the hardest things I've ever done.
Yeah, it was another Kilimanjaro. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, what is your next challenge after you defended your PhD and after you climbed Kilimanjaro?
Think I want to implement some pipelines that we can directly use in our clinical setting and that will help out with our patients in the clinical setting in our current program. So I think those are my next projects. Another big project that I'm working on is we already have a beautiful database, but I want to make it even bigger and better. So that's a big thing I'm working on as well, just because I think it's just magical because we have 30 years worth of data. We have it all. I just want to have it super organized and beautiful for everyone to be able to access it. And if we have our interns coming in, or we work with neuropsychologists, or we work with the MDs or with the neurosurgeons, I want us to be able to do our beautiful collaborative projects using this big database. So that's something we're working on right now.
Yes, and I would like to point it to our listeners that there are many medical centers where the data has been stored for years and they need people who would make sense of this data, who would organize this data, who would make it accessible, the things that you are doing and still applying to do. Yes. How do you see the use of AIs in the processes that you are creating and in data analysis?
Oh, that's actually a good question. So we actually have a lot of lectures in at conferences about AI and how to use it in clinical settings and how to use it in research settings. I don't use it as much. I use machine learning algorithms and whatnot, but I don't use AI as much other than smaller AI programs such as, I forgot what they're called, but there's some programs where you can put a scientific paper up and you can ask it to summarize it, or you can ask, find me 10 papers that are connected to this paper. Those type of tools I use a lot. But for my actual analysis, I code everything by scratch for now, but I do use certain machine learning algorithms for further processing. But I know they are using a lot of AI tools, or they're working on a lot of AI tools to do automated note taking. So when you have all the data available, then the AI tool can basically take all the data and create your note for you, which would save a lot of time for the MDs. And then they obviously have to check the note to make sure everything is accurate. But that would be wonderful if something like that could be implemented so they have more time for the patient to spend with the patient.
And also, can it help to integrate all the results from different modalities? Because, like you already mentioned, we have EEG, ECOG, fMRI, PET, SPECT, various results that need to come together and make a total sense. So, what do you think would be the role of AIs in this type of integration?
I think similar, right? So I think that's a little bit further ahead, but I think similar once we have all the results of all the different scans and all the different data points, then those results can be integrated into a final result or a note that can then be interpreted for, let's say, a conference, a pre-evaluation conference that can help us decide what the best treatment plan is for the patient or what is recommended for surgery. That is definitely a couple years out, but that would be wonderful, especially if a physician or a neurosurgeon or a neuropsychologist, they can all work on it separately. And then you have an AI tool work on it as well. And then you can compare who does what. I think that's incredible. But similarly, as for example, the MELT study I was talking about earlier, I believe that is an AI tool that finds the focal cortical dysplasia in the brain that can sometimes not even be identified by the human eye. So, having a tool like that available actually helps us. And it's not meant to replace a radiologist, but it can just help the radiologist after they do their write up. The tool is implemented and can help to see what are other areas that could potentially be a target or not.
Yes, and it adds to the discussion of replacing or not replacing radiologists, neuroradiologists. So it's again that, yes, it's just a tool that can help. It's not to replace.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How can our listeners learn about the work you do?
I post a lot of my work on LinkedIn. Whenever we have a new publication out or there's an upcoming event, I post most of it on LinkedIn. That's where I post all my things.
Of course, we covered a lot of things today and very helpful. Thank you so much for everything you shared. Maybe there is something that you wanted to share, but I haven't asked about it yet. So that's the best time right now to do it.
I really wanted to say to anyone that is in their undergrad or in their PhD, reach for the stars because everything is possible and everything's possible if you make it possible. Identify a goal, make baby steps, and just work your way towards that goal. And if you really want it, you will reach it.
Yes, and you can climb Kilimanjaro and you can finish your PhD and become clinical research scientist. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Readers. It's been a great pleasure having you on our podcast. We all our
Wow.
audience from more than 55 countries all over the world are wishing you all possible success in your work, and we will be following up on your work and on the developments that you are doing in this amazing field and so much needed field of pediatric epilepsy surgery. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on here. It was an absolute delight to chat with you.
Thank you. Dear Neurocareers podcast listeners, thank you for joining me and my incredible guests on this exciting journey into careers in neuroscience and neurotechnologies. I hope you've been inspired by the stories of those turning groundbreaking ideas into impactful realities. If you are looking for more guidance on advancing your neurocareer, book a free consultation with me, Dr. K, your podcast host and neurocareers coach at the Institute of Neuroapproaches, the only career service dedicated specifically to the needs of professionals in neurotech. Let's take the next step toward your neurocareer success together. In addition to free consultations, the Institute of Neuroapproaches offers a variety of services designed to help you thrive in neurotech. First, professional development planning. We help you create a tailored career development plan, identify knowledge gaps, and equip you with the tools needed to achieve your goals in neuroscience and neurotechnologies. Second, resume and cover letter review. Get expert feedback on how to craft documents that are specifically designed for job opportunities in the neurotech field. Third, interview preparation. Sharpen your interview skills through mock interviews and targeted feedback, including soft skills, hard skills in neurotech, BCIs, EG, MEG, live coding, and presentation preparation. 4. Networking and job search strategy. Learn how to effectively network and uncover job opportunities while standing out in the competitive neurotech job market. 5. Negotiation and salary advice. Receive expert guidance on negotiating salaries and benefits and determining a fair salary range for your desired position. All this and more can be found at www.neuroapproaches.org. Again, www.neuroapproaches.org. So, what are you waiting for? Let's navigate the path to success in the world of neurocareers together and turn the impossible into possible. We're looking forward to working with you.